Welcome, everyone. I'm Dana Peever, decision expert, author, speaker, and podcast host. You're listening to the Wildly Courageous Women podcast. More women than ever are faced with challenging decisions on a regular basis. I am so privileged to sit down with them to discuss exactly what they've gone through and how they've come out the other side, realizing their wildest dreams. I'm sure you'll be able to relate. And don't forget to stay to the end to take advantage of my latest free gift. Let's get started. Welcome to the Wildly Courageous Women podcast. I'm Dana Peever, decision expert. And as always, we're here talking about decisions that have been made in our lives that were courageous or impactful or changed the course of our life, or even one that we wish we could go back on. Today, I have Holly Williams as my guest. Holly is an enthusiastic conversion copywriter who teaches women to write high converting emails. Thanks so much for joining me today, Holly.
Thanks for having me, Dana. I'm really excited to be here.
Great. Now, before we get started, I want to remind listeners that I ask all my guests what their most favorite app is on their phone outside of social media. So you'll want to stay to the end to hear what Holly has to say, because we sure get some great suggestions. You also want to stay to the end to make sure you get access to my latest freebie. So, Holly, we're going to take this step by step today. I want you to set the stage for us as it relates to the decision that you've so graciously offered to share with us today. So if you can get us started, tell us the background, maybe how old you were, where you were living, what was going on in your life.
Yeah, so this is actually a very not too distant decision that I've made. It's happened in the last 6 to 8 months.
Okay.
And so it's a decision that I made to fire a client. And this was a client that I had worked with for quite a while and was really the big lion's share of my income.
Wow.
So it was a big leap to step away from it.
Okay. So walk us back then in terms of, how long you had been working with this client, how often your interactions were, those types of things. Like what kind of relationship did you have with this person?
Yeah. And, I guess I don't want to necessarily say the word fire because I just needed to, they were moving in a direction that my values no longer aligned with.
Wow.
And so I needed to step away from them. But yeah, I was working for them basically almost weekly, sometimes, daily in their business. Then we did weekly. Sometimes I would do bi-monthly. It was a very wonderful relationship, very flexible relationship, okay. Very understanding and to support my own life. I'm a single mom. So sometimes deadlines would get pushed or things would happen with my kids. Wonderful, wonderful team of people. And there was just some directions that they started to go in that I realized I can't write for this anymore. I don't support this. I don't believe in it. Some of the marketing they had grown bigger, brought on a different marketing team. Some of the marketing language and tactics that they wanted to use, I just wasn't in support of any longer. So for myself as a conversion copywriter, I really believe we can sell really powerfully without using shame tactics, fear tactics, or really these high pressure situations where you've got like 24 hours to make a decision on a pretty big ticket item. Right. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's right to do to people, especially because in the industry that I was in, and you'll notice I'm being a little bit more generic because I do want to protect this company. They've been wonderful, but it's not the direction I want to go in. But when you're dealing with an audience that is very serious about having their problem solved and will do what they need to do to get this problem solved, mm-hmm. I think putting people in a high pressure situation is not the way to go with serving these individuals. I think some of these people need the time to just really process that decision, mm-hmm. and come to an arrival that they realize this is really the best step for them. And if they do have to take out some money, or if they do have to, reallocate funds in order to work with this company, that is a decision they're not feeling pressured to do. They're not feeling that there's kind of this gun to their head with this time decision. And if they do, they miss out, or then constantly be told in the messaging, like, well, what's your, the underlying message is like, what's your problem? Like, why can't you commit to this? Isn't this important to you? And so for me, I just couldn't walk in agreement with that kind of messaging. So, and then also it just kind of took on a little bit more of a woo-woo spirituality kind of context as well. And so for me, I'm a Christian, and that was something that just didn't align with my values anymore.
Right.
So I needed to walk away from that. Yeah.
So a couple things. I hear you when you talk about the pressure, and I've done a lot of research lately in that arena as well, because I think for so many years in online businesses, it was shoved down our throats that we needed to have big ticket items, and you needed to be like, if you weren't willing to commit, then you were never going to have results. And
Right.
I've seen a real shift lately where, and somebody described it as, the high ticket pressure sales is very masculine energy. And
Yes.
then the more feminine approach is meeting them where they need to be met instead of the
Yeah.
pressure tactics. And I'm seeing a lot more of that online these days. And it sounds like that's kind of the camp that you fall into in terms of just being truly authentic in your message.
Yeah, it truly is. And I think just for myself, one of the things that makes me a good conversion copywriter is when I sit down to write, I always put myself in that. I take it like sometimes it takes 20, 30 minutes, but I really get into that mindset of like, if this email was to come across this person's life on their worst day, of their worst feeling in the depths of this problem that this product solves,
Mhm.
what would I want to say to them? And I know for sure that the thing I don't want to say to them is like, quick, you better make a decision now or your life's doomed.
Right.
Because when you actually take the moment to like connect with that emotion, really connect with that emotion of the person, that where they're at and having their hardest day, you want to be compassionate. You want to send a message that says, actually, just grab my hand and let every step is an arrival. Like every step is an arrival. So if the step you can take today is to move forward or to take this course, then I want to help you get there. If you don't have the means, here's your freebie. And of course, with sales, like there does need to be like I always say, people make the decision they should have made 6 months ago.
Mhm.
So you do have to have a little bit of a push in your emails. It's like, hey, come on, like if this is something you really want, like you do need to go after it. I just think there's better ways than using shaming language, fear, kind of pitting themselves against, like, well, if you really wanted your future, you'd do whatever it takes. And I think, there's a lot that I want for my future, but I also want to have a great relationship with my kids. And so sometimes I have to press pause on whatever my ambition was to just sit with my kids and be in the moment with them, walk them through whatever they're going through. So to have that kind of pressure and push to that I can't achieve my goals unless I do this is very aggressive. And some people respond great to that. And that's why that marketing works. But I find that the more I interview the clients and the customers that I'm writing for, I'm finding that they're not in that headspace.
Right.
And so then you have to get creative with your copy, and you have to get very compelling with your message and your offer to say, come alongside, like, let's really look at what you need. And I'm going to show you how this is actually the solution that, yes, there might be a little bit of risk in it, but here's how we can minimize that risk. Here's how we can take a deep breath about it.
That's a phenomenal perspective for sure. And I think what you're bringing up, I have a friend who, whenever she's making a decision, she ensures that fear isn't one of the factors that she's taking into consideration. And that's such an important message. Like, even as an example, buying a house, if it's not exactly the house you want, but you have fear of not getting in the market soon enough,
Right.
not just buy the house for that reason alone, right? If that
Right.
fear is propelling you. So I feel like that's, the shift that you're talking about in terms of how you have to capture,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. And if I can, I'd love to give an example for your audience to use, whether in their social media or in their emails that they are using,
absolutely.
is especially if you're doing a launch, like include an email called "Let's Take Fear Off the Table." and actually just get honest with your audience and say, hey, maybe you're feeling the fear, like, if I don't join now, I'm never going to be that person I want to be. If I don't, if I don't take action here, or whatever those fears might be, like, I don't have the money, I don't have this. Let's talk honestly about it. If you don't have the money, my personal, like most companies that I work with, their personal belief is like, let's not send you into debt to take this course. Like, if you can't see yourself making ROI on something, like within 90 days, like don't invest in the course. Like, take a deep breath. The last thing you need is trouble sleeping at night because, how am I going to pay for this $7,000 course? Or, nobody needs that. So just be honest with your audience, address their fear, and say, let's take this off the table. So then in that email or that social media post, then you can start to talk about, so here would be some great reasons why you want to take it. And then start painting that vision, right? Here's who you get to be. Here's how this transforms. Here's what habits fall away. Here's, just start painting a better picture. But if you can first, quiet that trauma brain that's like, I need to protect myself, and be honest with them. And then that will build incredible amount of trust. And then when you start to paint that picture of who they can become, you're going to see people shift, and maybe they're not ready now to buy, but they certainly will be starting to buy your smaller products, those $17, $27, $97 offers, right? For those who are on online business, I'm sure you have an audience that also sells varying degrees, but yeah, like, let's just get honest with the audience, right?
Right. Wow. So, this is really interesting. And I think, we went on a little tangent there, but I think it's all very relevant. So let's go back then to this client that you were working with, and just what was there kind of a final interaction or something that happened that triggered you that just said, I can't do this anymore? Or what, help me understand what that turning point was.
Yeah. So it was, I didn't want to make the decision because they were my bread and butter, like this was my meal ticket client, where if I just wanted to have a low month, I would just work with this client and not take on any other work. It would pay, all my bills, and I'd still have money to have fun. So it was one I didn't want to make, but what it basically came down to were two things. One was I couldn't stay congruent with myself anymore, right? I wanted to grow my business, and I wanted to start expanding on my own messaging. And I just found myself in conflict whenever I would go to write my own messages and my own social media, because I was like, I am actually not being honest to my own values here. Wow. And so I need to make a decision. And then the second thing was just, they really started to head down a different road with this new marketing team. And I worked great with this marketing team. I learned so much. They're like, great level of genius, was able to, very supported by them. But I would just found I was butting heads a little bit in terms of what they really wanted to do and send them the direction they really wanted to head. They were really building bigger. And I had great success with this company. I built like a $50K monthly funnel for them, done like millions of dollars with them in copy and different products. So it was a fun team to be a part of, right? Because we had grown, we had hit those success levels. And then you branch out and get a marketing team that can handle the more robustness that your business needs. And I just realized, like, we have to part ways. So I put off the decision as long as I could, as we're wont to do. But then I just had to get honest with myself. And I was like, I was starting to actually get unhappy. And then I was starting to get stressed out, and I couldn't write. Like, I'd sit down and I'd have writer's block, which for me is always an indication like something's not gelling with the message for me.
So was the writer's block, is it related to that client or just in general?
Just related to that client. Like, I would sit down to do their work and I would just be stalled, or I'd be like, everything felt like molasses, when like before I could totally just sit down and things would just pour out of my fingers, on the keyboard. So there was all those little signs that were just telling me like, hey, you're not living congruently here. So yeah.
It almost feels like, the word that comes to mind is sellout. Like, if you continue, that's what you'd almost be if you were.
Yeah. And you know what? I did start to like feel that way about myself, like that I was in it for the money, which and then you justify and you're like, well, kids need clothes, people need to eat, and you start to like give all these reasons for yourself. But at the end of the day, it came down to my integrity.
Right.
And I was like, am I going to be integral with who I am and what I care about? And yes, and I was very able to still like finish the work. I wanted to finish it well, leave on a good note. I love to be integrous in my work. So I was able to do that well. But oh yeah, there was definitely like, where if your mouth doesn't say it, your body will. My body was like not letting me sleep. And
Wow.
I was just starting to feel depressed. Yeah.
Goodness. So, how did you end it? Like, was there a conversation, an email? What was the?
Yeah, so this is a beautiful thing that because the marketing team and everything had grown, basically the CMO, this chief marketing officer, he was such a gift to me. He really taught me how to have some difficult conversations and just how to have courageous conversations. That's what I would say. And when I approached him, I was able to just let him know that I needed to head in a new direction. Very supportive. And the thing is, he was very complimentary of my work, which is always great because, as a writer, even though I'm a copywriter, which is a science and an art, I always feel like I'm more of an artist. And so when I put words out there, I'm always like, was that good? But just to see the I don't know, it's just nice to part on good terms. And I think when I thought I was letting go of these people, how you build things up in your mind, I thought, oh, this is going to be horrible. They're going to be like, we've spent all this time with you. They were so supportive. They were just like, yeah, you need to move in another direction. Thank you so much for everything you've done. You've created really strong building blocks for us to move forward with and everything. So it was very amicable. It was very Hallmark movie breakup.
I love that though. And I think, too often we only feel like a conversation like that can't go well.
Right.
It's going to be ugly. Like, what's the saying they say? No relationship ever ends well, because if it was still going well, why would it end?
Right.
So, I did a podcast not too long ago about when I had to fire a business partner. And one of the things I talked about in that one was a friend of mine had said, what is the best possible outcome you can envision coming out of this conversation? Like, blue sky that, what could it be? And for you, maybe it was that they would recommend you or provide, testimonials or something like that, and continue to speak highly of your work while you transitioned on. And I think, I've used that approach since my friend, instilled that in me. And it makes it so much easier to go in with kindness as opposed to finger pointing or blaming. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when you're, again, this goes back to honesty, right? If you can be honest about, hey, here's my needs, here's what I'm doing, and just like own your stuff in a conversation, I think more often than not, you'll find that people are willing to listen. It's more like, as long as you're not like at the 11th hour when they need you to do something that you're like, yeah, this is too tough, I'm backing out. Like, nobody appreciates that, right? But that respect of like, okay, if somebody was going to leave me, would I want them to do it? Would I want advance warning? Would I want a conversation in person and not in an email? How would you want to be treated? And so I kind of went in with that. And then also I had built up a good relationship with the CMO, because sometimes talking up was challenging for me. And he created such great space for me to be able to say, I want to have a conversation with you, but I might say things awkwardly. Are you okay with me just kind of maybe verbal diarrheaing this a little bit? And very patient, and said, yeah, sure, just spit it out, say what you need to say, and so that gave me a lot of room to be able to build up a good relationship with him. To be able to, when I needed to step back, just have a positive conversation. And I think sometimes if you come in with that humility of, what, hey, I want to have this conversation, but I don't know how to do it, and I want to do it well, can we just try and have this conversation? I think a lot of times you'll find that people really, all of a sudden, their posture too in that conversation shifts to be really like leaning forward and attentive in that conversation.
Right, right. So Holly, I'm curious. You talked about a couple different reasons why, there wasn't congruency anymore.
Mhm.
Did you identify those in the conversation, or sometimes it's just it's better not to share the whole truth? It's something I need to learn. But was it a situation where you kind of chose a happy medium to indicate why you were moving away, or what did you?
Well, I was also looking at possibly pivoting to a completely different option in my life at the time too. So I kind of brought that in. I didn't say that it was a for sure thing, but I said, I'm really looking at this, and in the next 3 months, and in order to do that, I also need to focus on that. And I think the next 3 months will be crucial for them to prepare, because they were going into some really big launches and stuff. So it was also like, this will be a good time to break somebody in as I'm moving out. So I kind of found a couple of positives, but I didn't go into everything, because some of it was just a little bit more personal to me. And then some of it was like, I'm not going to change their mind on some of the avenues they're going down. So I just wanted to leave it on a really positive note. And one thing that I learned really well, actually, was I listened to the John Deloney show, which I love, great parenting advice. And he had talked about, somebody had called in and said, like, how do I break up with somebody? And he's like, well, you do it the same way you would fire someone. You sit down and you say, a decision has been made. This is what's happened. And, you just lay out the facts. And like, if you need to circle back, we'll talk about it. So that's kind of what I did. I just did a decision's been made, so you can't change my mind. This conversation isn't going to change my mind. This is the steps that I'm taking. And hey, if anything comes up after this conversation and you want to just like hit me back up and have a call, like, let's do that.
Wow. And I think, Holly, what happens is people sometimes aren't confident enough in the decision that they're making, that they leave room to be swayed.
Yes. Yeah. I think having that firm statement of like, a decision has been made, like, that was very empowering to me, right? Like, hey, I've made a decision, and just starting it off that way. And it's like, for me, I felt actually a little taller while I was talking on the phone. My spine went up a little bit, and my head went up, and I was like, yeah, I have made this decision. And like most of us, right? Once you've committed to the decision, taking the follow-up actions, not that difficult, but it's the inner turmoil and the inner struggle of arriving at that decision point that really is the place where you're like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing.
And that's where I come in. But anyway, I wish I'd been around, because I'm curious. Did you talk to friends? How did you come to the decision that this was right for you? And how long did it actually take you to make that decision?
Yeah, it probably took me 3 months, actually. Yeah. So I noticed things starting to show up in my work slightly before the 3 months, right? That's when I was like, hey, like, why isn't this so easy to do anymore? And why am I feeling not as inspired? And why is that, like, started to ask those questions. And then, as it does, right, the light slowly dawns on you, and you're like, oh. So I had talked to one of my best friends for a little bit. I talked to my business coach about it. And they were both really great of just asking me really great questions to help me arrive at it.
Right.
And in particular, my best friend was just like, so why are you afraid to do this? Like, let's just play it out. Travel down worst case scenario road. What happens? Like, well, like, I lose this client, and then I never get another client again. And, like, I have to close up shop and get a job, doing something I don't want to do. And she's like, wow, that's like really bleak. Like, have you looked at your skill set? Have you looked at what you've been able to accomplish for these companies? Do you think someone else could see the value in hiring you to write copy for them? And it's like, oh yeah, you're right. So it's kind of like when you have this really one solid client that you've had for a couple of years, and you rely on it, there's so much safety, right? And actually, it's interesting you mentioned the word safety. What happened was I was actually at church, and my pastor was preaching on this famous passage in the Bible, which was like where Jesus invites Peter to get out of this boat, and there's this big storm going on. And most people tend to really celebrate the fact, like, wow, Peter was so brave, he got out of the boat. But my pastor's message that day was just on like, the boat was never safe to begin with. It was out on the sea and it was stormy. And everybody thinks that, oh, I'm in this boat and it's safe. And he's like, it was never safe to begin with.
Wow.
And so that was like just hearing that message for me, I went back and I was like, oh, you know what? I've put a lot of safety in this one client, but the truth is they could have fired me at any point. Their business could have gone belly up, like this.
They could have their internal team so much that they didn't need you, those types of things.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So there was just a lot of things where I was like, oh, I've put a lot of safety in this idea, but that's not actually true. Right. So it was just a really good eye opener for me to realize like, it's okay. Every decision is risky.
Right.
And you can just make a new decision.
Mm-hmm.
So take the one that feels scary, do the thing you need to do. And as soon as I did, I still had some project work that I wanted to finish up for them. And it just came so easily to me. I was able to write it like within one day, whereas before it was taking like a couple of days stretched out. So it was just really good. It felt like all the writer's blocks that you have were removed and just all the creativity came back.
Wow. Is there anything that you would change? And let me answer part of it. It sounds like you wish it hadn't taken you as long to make that decision.
Yeah, for sure. I would change that because I was dishonest with myself. And that's what I think I feel a bit disappointed in, is that I didn't want to be honest with myself. But in waiting that long and delaying that self has brought me into a new season of just really checking in a lot more with myself. So probably needed it.
Oh, I love that so much. Well, thank you for sharing that, because I think there are probably a lot of listeners out there who find themselves potentially working with clients that they're not in line with. And I'm not saying you have to like live and breathe everything that you say on their behalf,
yeah.
But like you said, when it starts to affect you physically, or if you've got some kind of block, it's a great opportunity for you to at least step back and take a look at the situation and what it's bringing you. So kudos to you for stepping back and acknowledging the symptoms and the signs that you were receiving. And also, that decision is so courageous, especially in the situation that you were in, it being your biggest client, from a financial stability perspective. I think there are so many people who make decisions like that other people don't know that they could ever make. So, the bravery that took is commendable. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, I was happy to. I hope it helped some of your listeners.
I assure you it will. I'm even taking some notes as we move away.
Oh, good.
So, all right, Holly, one final question I promised we'd get to. Outside of social media, I need to know what your most favorite app on your phone is. And you can't say the Decision Smith app because we know that's everybody's favorite. So outside of that one, what would you say your favorite app is?
Yeah, so I don't want to be on my phone a whole lot because I am on social media quite a bit. So I actually just love my pedometer. I want to know, have I been hitting my 10,000 steps? So I just love checking that out. And I love seeing the progress actually throughout the day, because it actually is a visual reminder to me that I am moving forward. Which is a big theme for me, moving forward. So I love seeing the step count, and I love the challenge of like, oh, I got to fit this in, and making sure that my 80-year-old self is going to thank me, right? For looking at that when it's 2,000 steps short and saying, okay, bundle up, let's go outside and let's just get those steps in. So
that's perfect. That's perfect. Thanks for sharing that. So Holly, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time with me today and your stories. And to all of our listeners out there, thank you for joining us. If you're ready to realize your wildest dreams, come and join us in the Wildly Courageous Women's Facebook group, where we're changing people's lives one brave decision at a time. I'm Dana Peever. Until next time, make great decisions and do life fun. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Wildly Courageous Women. Keep listening to hear more stories of these incredible women realizing their wildest dreams. If you have a story to tell about a decision that you've made that has impacted your life, I'd love to feature you as a guest. Please get in touch, and don't forget to grab my latest gift by clicking below. I'm Dana Peever. As always, make great decisions and do life fun.